land of ours and fill a sportsman's dreams. Enjoy what nature holds for us, her bounty never ends. Getting back to basics with the practical sportsman. It's always an adventure, no matter where we go. From a favorite hunting spot to the hottest fishing hole. Outdoor life we all can share with family and friends. We'll do it all together with a practical sportsman. We'll do it all together with a practical sportsman.
Hello, sportsmen. Hopefully, Hurricane Mitch is going to leave us alone in the south, and up north here, I hope we're done with the gales of November. But we did, believe it or not, go duck hunting on Tuesday in Saginaw Bay. I'm going to take you along in just a moment. We're going to also talk about TB in deer. Is it really a big human health problem? We also have some legal issues to discuss. So you stay tuned. I'm Fred Trost with some real pertinent information for deer hunters. At first light on Tuesday, November 10th, Matt Radzalowski cranked up the camera to document one of the worst duck hunting days anybody could pick. The forecast was for wind gusts up to 70 miles an hour. Hardly anybody went hunting on this day. Everybody told us we were foolish to try it. Well, at 8 o'clock or so, the sky got a little brighter, and a lone duck did come winging in. Well, it didn't really wing in, it just winged by at a distance. Our decoys, pummeled by the wind, did not seem to interest that duck. Brian Henry from Bayport was our guide. Roger Nichols from Langsburg, well, he was the ringleader.
Okay, we got 5-6 mallards right here in front of us right now.
Yep. Well, it was not easy to see ducks flying against the sky and against the drizzle and the rain and against the wind. I mean, the ducks weren't flying very close. In fact, there weren't very many of them at one time. And they had to work hard flying against the constant 30 to 40 mile an hour wall of southerly wind. I mean, we had to work hard just to sit still and look at the sky. The wind was blowing the rain at terrific speeds. I mean, at times it felt like we were being pelted with sand pebbles. Sometimes the rain would let up a little. Other times, it seemed to pick up steam. You know, wind is usually good for duck hunting, but today it was way too much. Well, the closest duck that flew by was not only a little too far away, but look how the wind blows the plastic shotgun wad as soon as it comes out of the barrel. I mean, we totally underestimated the strength of the wind. If the wad was blowing like this, peeling off to the left, how far off course do you suppose the wind was blowing our steel shot? Now, wind may be invisible, but it has incredible power. Brian Henry stepped out of the blind to reset the decoys. Look how deep the water is. Well, actually, how deep it isn't. On a normal day, Brian would be up to his knees or maybe his thighs, but the strong south wind had blown most of the water out of the bay, leaving only 6 or 8 inches. Now, we were 4 miles off Bayport, tucked in behind some islands, but most of the water you're looking at is only a few inches deep. There was no way to use a regular boat with an outboard motor. The only reason we could get out here was because Brian Henry had an airboat. Brian's boat could not sink in 6 inches of water, and we were somewhat protected by the islands to our west. But 23 years ago on this day, the Edmund Fitzgerald hit an incredible storm in Lake Superior and tragically sunk. This 1998 storm was even fiercer than the storm of 23 years ago. It was a day that very few ducks and very few hunters could be seen on Saginaw Bay. Oh, I tell you, today is the day we should have gone. The gales of November are finally sending those flight ducks and geese south, but it's time to get ready for Sunday's deer opener. Now, one question on the minds of a lot of hunters is bovine tuberculosis something that you can actually get from deer or deer meat? Well, I was talking to DNR pathologist Tom Cooley. He does a lot of autopsies at the Rose Lake Wildlife Research Center. And we were talking about some of the abnormal deer that people sent us on home video. I used that opportunity to ask Tom about the human health threat from bovine TB. Now, this deer here, this was up in the Atlanta area. This is the tuberculosis area, and everybody jumps to the conclusion that's what that is.
Yeah. Really, this should have nothing to do with TB from the location of where it is. With tuberculosis, you do see two types of that. There's a respiratory part to it, and there can be a digestive part to it, depending on how the organism was taken in. The digestive part, back when humans would get bovine tuberculosis, that's what it was. They were ingesting milk that was not pasteurized, and so they were getting their abdominal organs, abdominal lymph nodes affected, and with those, you would get like abscesses in those lymph nodes, that type of thing. It's not going to look like anything like this. You're not going to get massive development of organs or anything like that, or massive abscesses even with that type of tuberculosis. That's not really the type that we've been dealing with, or the part that we've been dealing with. It's the respiratory form that we have been seeing. We have had one fawn that did have some of the abdominal lymph nodes that were affected, and that fawn would have probably picked it up through its nursing or through the close contact with the doe, but that would have actually been an ingestion rather than an inhalation or respiratory form.
Is there any concern that people can catch tuberculosis from the deer?
Well, there's always a concern. I mean, we can't say it can't happen. The likelihood of it occurring is going to be very slim, just because you're not going to have the repeated chronic type exposures to an animal that is infected that you need to get transmission to occur. That's why we're telling the deer hunters, even if you have an animal that is positive and you field dress that animal, the short period of time that you're exposed to those lungs, to that viscera, it's insignificant, and the likelihood of you contracting tuberculosis by doing that field dressing is basically unimportant. There's the chances of any infection occurring is so slim that you don't really need to be concerned about that. Now, if you're going to have constant day-to-day contact with those deer, live deer, and you're nose-to-nose to them and working with them, then it's possible that, yeah, you could contract it that way. But none of our deer hunters are going to have that type of contact. And that's how, like with the deer-to-deer transmission, it's felt that that's how that transmission occurs, is they are nose-to-nose, day after day, all winter long, maybe all year long, depending on where they're feeding, and that transmission can take place much easier that way.
Are there any diseases from animals, from game, that hunters have to be concerned about?
Not really. With any of the animals, the rubber gloves on field dressing your deer, back when Lyme disease was talked about and a lot of the other diseases, we've always told people that it's not a bad idea to wear rubber gloves when you're cleaning anything like that, whether it's a dairy or whether it's a cow or a goat or a deer or whatever, because there are bacteria there. And if you do have open cuts on your hands, you could get infections that way. You got to use some common sense on that, and you make sure you use disinfectants after you work on them and that sort of thing. But other than that, they're going to see a lot of things that are unusual that they'll question, whether it's tapeworm cysts or nematodes that they see, or liver flukes in the deer, the fibromas or papillomas, the wart-like growths that deer get on them, the little black-like wart growths. They're going to see those kinds of things and wonder what's going on, and those are the kinds of calls that we get, or our field people get, on what's occurring here.
I talked to Tom Cooley about some of these other problems people see in deer. We'll have that on a future show, but for right now, keep in mind what Tom just said. The short period of time that you're exposed to those lungs, to that viscera, it's insignificant. The likelihood of you contracting tuberculosis by field dressing is basically unimportant. the chances of any infection occurring is so slim that you don't really need to be concerned about that. Well, this does not mean that you shouldn't be sanitary, because you can get bacterial infections from a lot of things, but tuberculosis in deer, whether it's from field dressing or from eating the meat that might not be cooked to 160 degrees, it's not a worry to hunters. Now, let's shift gears to a legal question that a lot of private land hunters have been asking, which is, does a conservation officer have the right to come onto private land without having any evidence that a person on that land is breaking the law? This was last week's opinion poll question on our website. Well, the reason hunters ask this is because they feel that COs sometimes interfere with their legal hunting by traipsing across their private property on opening day. They don't like anybody to interfere, whether it's a CO or anybody else, another hunter trespassing, whoever. The first few days of deer season are very, very important to hunters. And if they're on private land, which they pay for, or on leased land, they don't want to be disturbed. Now, I tried to pin down Mike Hansen, a 25-year veteran conservation officer, on this question, and his answer, which involved some skating and dancing with my questions, was interesting. Okay, so a landowner has a right to have exclusive possessory rights on this property.
Absolutely.
Now, what about law enforcement officers on that property? This is a concern that people...
I don't think it's been resolved completely. You know, I would say that it's in flux at this time. You know, if you look at the legal opinions, you can look at what the federal Supreme Court says, and in the open field doctrine, there is relatively no, you know, there aren't many restrictions unless you're causing harm. If you're performing your duty, the open field doctrine said, you know, on any drug case they've had where there's been no trespassing signs and everything else, you know,
I mean, don't they have to have probable cause, though?
No.
To go on?
Not under the federal statute. All right, now, you know, that it hasn't, you look at the open field doctrine that says if there's somebody out there and there's a reason, not probable cause. That's a big difference between probable cause. You know, I can't go out there and go hunting on your property because I'm a cop. All right, I have no right to do that. I'm talking in performance of your duty in some fashion, which could include, you know, there's somebody just shot a deer on the other side of the property. A direct route across this other private property, all right, is the most direct route to make an arrest. I mean, that's one reason to go on private property.
But what if an officer is not going to make an arrest? I mean, don't you have more rights on public property where you can, under the municipal judge case of 1951, you can make certain checks of people for their license. You can do a limited search on their game bag and so on that a regular cop can't do.
Well, a regular cop could if they had the jurisdiction on that land. I mean, the difference between a conservation officer and another cop is that, you know, we're empowered to make those checks on that public land. Probably this local officer is not.
On the, those types of checks.
Yeah.
Now, what about then the public versus private land? Does that same limited search capability extend to private land?
It may and it may not. You know, it's almost a case by case. In other words, if I just wanted to take a walk and go pick mushrooms on your property, or just decide to take a walk, I would question that, you know, but the court hasn't resolved it completely yet.
But can you go on to private land to check licenses? Only just to see if somebody has a license?
Sure.
Can you go and check, even if you don't see anybody hunting but you think they're hunting there, can you go onto that land just to see if anybody's hunting there?
It's possible, yeah. I mean, I would, you know, that's a pretty sketchy.
But I mean, don't you have to, normally a police officer has to have some sort of idea of a crime being committed or some evidence or something that he's looking for, other than just an open fishing expedition just to see what's going on.
I think you'd find if you look at the drug, you know, the drug people, a lot of times that's what they're doing is just a random search. They get information, but you know, they're going to go out to corroborate it. For instance, you may have an anonymous complaint that something's going on, and they said you ought to take a look in this 40. So you take a walk. All right, that's different than just taking a walk. All right, but you're not going to reveal a confidential source either. I mean,
but does an anonymous tip get it?
Sometimes, if you can corroborate something. All right, for instance,
Okay.
you know, there's some corroboration. You know, and again, it hasn't been totally resolved by the courts in any cases I've looked at. You know, there's
So you're saying that it's still a gray area as to a law enforcement capability to go onto private hunting land during hunting season, that hasn't totally been resolved as to what the extent.
it's continually being redefined as just as another way to look at it. Sure.
Mike Hansen is a retired CO. Now, he doesn't speak for the department, but after 25 years on the force, I think you can take his statements as a pretty good indication of how COs look at the question I'm posing, which is, does a conservation officer have the right to come onto private land without having any evidence that a person on that land is breaking the law? Now, you just heard Officer Hansen say, quote, "It hasn't been totally resolved by the courts. It's continually being redefined," which is just another way to look at it. Well, what did you viewers say in our website opinion poll? 26% said yes, a CO could come onto private land whenever they want, without a warrant or without probable cause, but 74% said no. It's not something law officers should be able to do if they don't have a concrete reason. Now, keep in mind what Mike Hansen's answer was as a 25-year veteran of the department when I asked him if a conservation officer can trespass on private property without permission.
Possibly. But
Well,
I mean,
we're into the gray area then.
yeah, I mean, in other words, you just to say always yes and always no, no. I mean, there is no definitive case that says this may happen. You know, it's almost a case by case.
Here's the crux of this issue, folks. Conservation officers will come onto private land without permission and without probable cause. Their justification will be, it's a gray area. Now, are they legally right in doing this? Well, as a law school graduate, my opinion is no. I think the U.S. Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, is crystal clear. I think the court cases are clear. Say without cause, it would be unreasonable for a governmental employee of any government agency, including COs, to trespass. And a private citizen could bring a lawsuit against a governmental employee for trespassing. But in order to do that, you must object to someone being on your property without permission. You have to ask him to leave. Now, that goes for any trespasser. If the CO says, "Can I look around? Can I check your deer? Can I see your gun?" and the CO does not have a warrant, or he can't tell you exactly what he's looking for or what basis he has for thinking someone has committed a violation on your property, then my legal research tells me that this is not a gray area. Now, if you give the CO permission to stay, then you have waived your constitutional rights. If you want to stand by your constitutional rights, though, you should ask the officer to please leave your property now, that he's not welcome to look around just to see if he can find any violations. Now, under the court case Roth versus Younger, that was in 1950, the Michigan Supreme Court overturned a statute that allowed COs to search people at will. Now, be careful, because on public land, the CO does have the authority to stop you, ask for your license, search your game bag, look at your gun, and so on. But on private land, that's a different story. On private land, my position, from what I've learned, is that COs cannot enter just to look around. They have to have a warrant or probable cause if they have not observed a violation on that property, a violation that would give them a basis to make an arrest. Now, that's the constitutional position that I take. Public land, private land, two different things. Now, I did not just give you legal advice. I told you my constitutional interpretation of what COs call a gray area. Now, this gray area can only be clarified by challenging an officer's action in court. That's how gray areas become more clear. Now, I'm sure that what I just told you will only be the beginning of a big controversy, but I feel this is a very important question. Government versus the people. Innocent people being searched and trespassed so government can just look around? Well, talk about this amongst yourselves. Should there be a difference between a person's rights on public versus private land? That's the opinion poll question for this week. Register your response on www.fredtrost.com. Oh man, details, details, details. If you're a detail person and you keep a diary or a log of your hunts, hey, I have a deer hunter you need to meet. Jim McBain from Gregory on a Washtenaw County got a 10-point buck. It made it with the points.
Yes.
13-inch spread, 6-inch tines. Got it with your Golden Eagle bow at 6:24 p.m.
Yes, I always mark the time exactly, and I write it right on the tag when I fill it out, because I keep a log of all my deer.
Now, well, this is kind of interesting, because we hear all these hunters who, come unglued, they get the deer, they drop their bow and they scream and they run and all this. And so you shoot, release the arrow, drop the bow, grab your notebook, check the clock.
No, I look at my watch. As soon as I shoot, I look at my watch to see what time it was. 'Cause I always try and keep it right to the minute. I try and keep a good log.
What would happen if you didn't? Does that scare you a little bit? Like, do you ever have dreams at night where you shot something and you forgot to look at your watch and then you wake up and go, ah!
No, it's not that bad. But I didn't start keeping a log until after I had like 10 or 11 deer, and I had trouble remembering all the details. So then I started writing everything down, so I wouldn't run into that, because I started getting them all mixed up, and it got hard to keep track of them.
Don't you think it would be interesting, though? Let's see your watch. Don't you think it would be interesting if you also put the seconds?
No.
No, I mean, I'm not really making fun, but, I was thinking about this today I was actually thinking about when you keep track of, I was doing my mileage in the car, for my car, and I wrote down how much gas I had, and I divided it, and it came out to be 22.6 miles. And I wrote down 23 miles per gallon, and I thought, why don't I do 22.6? So, why don't you keep the seconds? You could.
You don't keep the hundredths of your mileage.
You have this is something we ought to think about. We haven't had anybody yet come and say, I got it at 6:24:36. That could be?
I'm not going to do that.
You're not going to do that? Okay. We've pushed him to his limit. So,
Okay.
at 6, did you know, just out of curiosity, what time it was before you shot?
I had looked at my watch, yes. I knew that there was, on the trail I was watching, I'd had a doe and 2 fawns come out. The button buck would usually come out about 6:45, with the doe and other fawn following about 10 minutes later. And I was sitting up in my tree stand, I was reading a Reader's Digest, and I kept watching my watch every now and again, because I knew at 6:45 I'd have to put it down and start watching the deer. And this one started coming through a little earlier. I could hear him off in the distance. And when I first saw him, he was in a lot of brush, and I thought he was just a small deer. I'd already had a 4-point, so I knew I needed an 8-point or better. And I thought he was a 4 or 6 at first that had been running around, because it was a very narrow rack. And so I went back to read my Reader's Digest. I thought I'd have to pass on this one. But when he got up closer, I started counting the tines. He's got all these little stickers. And my rough count, I figured it was 10 or 11, so I decided I'd wait for an opportunity. And I think he caught my scent, because just before he got into my opening, he turned to the left and went off into some brush. He's maybe 18 or 20 yards out. And the only opening there was in the tree about 5 foot off my arrow tip. It's about 4 inches wide and 8 inches high. I had a little opening I could thread an arrow through. And I had to wait for him to step into a spot that would correspond with that. And I waited and waited. I was at full draw, just waiting for the longest time. And he came right up, almost to where he was going to step into that, and turned right straight toward me and snorted. And I thought he had winded me again, and he was going to turn. And he actually did, but he turned into my opening as he was getting ready to leave, and I let the arrow into him, and he only went a couple steps and dropped right there.
How many steps?
I didn't count, but it was within sight.
You didn't count them?
That's right.
Starting to lose credibility now. No, I'm just funning with. Are you an engineer?
No, I'm an engineering technician.
Okay. Well, that explains it. But I do have a theory. When you said that deer came and must have scented you and it moved on? No.
Yes.
No. That's not what happened. You know how you have it charted where the deer come out and what time they come out? This buck was coming out there, and he stood and he looked and he said, oh, it's about 9 minutes till 7. I better get going. That's what happened. They're on time frames. He's not buying it. No, it sounds like you really go at this. Your logs, what are you going to do with those? All those diaries that you keep?
Mostly I show them to my brother and tease him. He doesn't get as many deer.
No kidding.
And his biggest is a spike, so we call him Spike Boy.
Spike Boy, I wonder if that would apply to anybody else on this stage. Spike Boy. Well, Jim, Big Buck Boy, from Spike Boy, congratulations. Thank you. Way to go.
We just about have the camper all packed now. Next week, make sure you tune in. We're going to give you a report on our deer camp, on our opening day hunt, on the Mill Creek buck pole. They have some big ones down there. We're going to tell you how you can get on Big Buck Night and a lot more. So join me next week. Make sure you get outdoors this weekend. Have a safe hunt. Have fun. That's what it's all about. See you next week. Our schedule for the next couple of weeks is hectic, but it's a nice kind of hectic. We will be hunting on public land for the opener, but our deer camp will not be on the banks of the Manistee River like we did last year. We will not be staying in tents like we did last year. This year, we're enjoying the independence of RVs. I'll show you how we spent the opening of deer season in comfort next week. Now, if you get a big buck and bring it to the buck pole at Mill Creek Sports in Dexter, Matt and I will be there with the camera 7:30 p.m. Monday evening, November 16th. We'll find out how big the Southern Michigan bucks are this year, and you'll get a taste of that on next week's show, sort of a preview of Big Buck Night. Now, if you get a buck that has 10 antler points or an 18-inch outside spread or a tine that's at least 8 inches long, that goes for any size buck, even a spike, you qualify for one of our hunting awards. Call us if you need an entry form, and good luck.